podcast. This is our seventh time getting together. I guess every time we do it, we figure out what works and what doesn't work for us. And we've been realizing that some of the best conversations that we have as a crew, guys, are always following the podcast, which is really funny. And so, what
Yeah.
we're going to try to do today is we're going to try to have a more natural conversation, less structured around the current events. There's plenty of different people out there that you can get your current events from. What we want to do today is just talk about the creative spirit of the studio and the happenings within the studio. And we're going to be revealing some alpha for you guys today about one of the projects that we're working on. And I think one of the fun things there is that this is one of the projects that the studio is working on, which is just like really cool and more than you could say for other studios, right? There's so much happening within Proof of Beauty, and we're really excited to share it with you guys. So with that, I'll turn it over to you guys. How's the week, guys?
Been a good week.
Yeah, productive week. Very.
You
Yeah.
feel like you get the most amount of work done when the milestones. Right.
Right.
I feel such a sense of relief that we finally
Yeah.
got the tickets for the Alpha build.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt.
It was pretty satisfying cleaning up ABF and then it coming together. We just hit that merch button, so it's live. Yeah, but actually, big thing for this week is basically drawing a line in the sand for the merge project. I think we were avoiding it
Yeah.
for all these months, and then
Right.
fucking finally we realized like, God damn it, we have to do it, and here we are. So we got something.
It was one of those like you're put into a corner and then you're like, all right, you gotta throw some hands now or else you're
Yeah,
dead. And then in a moment of like not desperation but of
clarity.
realization of clarity there,
Right.
I think we went from nothing to something very fast.
Yeah,
And
Something
it's-
that feels
Yeah.
true to the studio as well, which is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
cool to see.
Yeah.
And it came out of nowhere.
I mean, I like that we were using the analogy to POB universe, like trying to make it this thing, but then we're basically doing that from a technical level actually now, which is
Mhm.
funny. So let's see.
Oh,
what
yeah.
happens.
Oh, yeah. all
Yeah,
kinds
that's
of
exciting
exciting
project.
things.
So yeah, that's a project that we're keeping on the DL for now, and I'm sure we'll have a dedicated podcast to talk about that in the future. Today we did want to talk about a project that Dave's been working really hard on, Ash has been working really hard on. The studio in general is super excited about this project, and that project is absolute brainfuck. And I'll let Dave introduce this project. It's really his baby, and kind of give us the lowdown what this project is. We're approaching alpha, and he can talk about what that means and where we're going from here. So with that, feel free to take it away, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I want to start by saying I'm not probably going to give the complete picture of the whole thing. More so, I'm just going to give context. I think that's my goal. Context. The project can have nuance potential.
Yeah.
Hard to explain, best felt. But yeah, in one sentence, you can say is ABF is our, as a studio, our first step, almost our like metaphorical moon landing into the on-chain world. And we're not just trying to say here's a small project. This is our way of saying we're going to go in with full force, with an objective mind share, with a way to try to change things, to establish a new paradigm in the place, in the world, but also to experiment with new forms of just creating NFTs again. And so in so many ways, both at a technical level, at an on-chain level, at a community level, at a brand level, the project is for us like a new frontier, and I think this project pretty much defines where the studio is going. This is the new studio after ABF's, I think, full launch, and I think that's where that gets very exciting because the project is just takes so much of our learnings over a year since the start of the studio and say
Right.
how can we adjust and do what we love in a way that allows us to focus on doing what we love. And I think ABF in some ways is also the baby of that, the product of that thought. And so that in some ways was some of the creation story, the creation myth of the ABF endeavor. It was something I wanted to do just for fun, write brainfuck on chain. But didn't know why I would do that. Like there was no purpose to doing that before. But then ABF was kind of the project that came out of the fun thought of like, let's do brainfuck on chain. But I was like, what are you gonna make with brainfuck on chain? Wait, let's just make art, right? Like that's what we do at the studio, and it only made sense to make a protocol and not just a singular. Uh, so yeah, ABF is just all forms of potential and expression from us in a way that I think you can read a lot between the lines with this project. And that's where I think we're going to have many podcasts just devoted to help almost give you the lines to read between. And yeah, I don't think I explained it per se. So let me do that first. Let me do that before we go any further in this conversation. But ABF is in some ways the best way to think about it is it's at the parity or at a competitive level similar towards a FX hash or a art blocks or a gen.art or GM Studio, right? If you think about it as a consumer, it's just a platform to mint, produce, and distribute a NFT generative art collection. And generative strictly implies that there is a computational component to the performance of art, right? It's not like Foundation or Zora's minting experience where it's more of a matter of static upload of data. It's a data dump. So ABF is a generative art platform that we built with one of the most unique aspects of it relative to other platforms. It's fully on chain, right? Like nothing about your actual product of an NFT is off chain. There's no IPFS files there. Right? It lives on forever. And go ahead. Sorry.
Sort of interrupt your thought there, but I was thinking maybe we can kind of just delineate the different forms of on-chain that we're seeing in the space right now, and what really makes Brainfuck different, because this is really important.
Yeah.
This is a great point, actually. Break down all the different levels or tiers.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of ways, and I think we all may have different nuanced variants of how we express it, but I think at the lowest level of the on-chain gradient, the scale, is a standard NFT that points their metadata to an API, an HTTPS file, right? Which in that such way, that's the most on-chain, the least on-chain variant, right, of a NFT, right? And then you could go from there a little higher.
You can explain why. Yeah, you can explain why too, right? So like if you in the metadata URI, the token URI, you just have a link to your website that's like whatever project.com/
or whatever, right?
Yeah, whatever it is, that server can go down, that image can go down, right? That's just a URL. That's all the NFT really is. It's just a URL. It's not even really the image.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the next level, you can go ahead.
The next level would then kind of crack into the IPFS layers, right? Where you are now not putting your data on a permanent decentralized network, but you're putting it on a decentralized distribution network. And there's a subtlety to that, right? Like, and I think this has been a big distinction in for a lot of folks is IPFS is not permanent. The thing itself as a protocol doesn't imply permanence of your data. It's more so just, it's almost like torrenting in some ways.
Yeah,
it's like
a way for redundancy. It's not really.
It's a way for redundancy.
Yeah.
Right. It's a way for the global network to work together to source files wherever it could find it within that network. Right. And so it's significantly better than HTTPS, right? Because if you do have a source copy of the file and you run a node, you are adding towards the redundancy of that information in this system, right? And that makes it more permanent, right? And that if you decide to stop paying for your server, somebody else who is, that means that this data is still available to everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, redundancy is really the name of the game because there's no such thing as permanent storage unless you have a data center on the moon, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think from there, that's where we're seeing to equality a kind of gray area of what really we can confine as on chain. In some most I think designs at this point for generative art, it's on chain means are given to you, but like on chain we give you the script written in another
Right.
language. We give you the source input file, like to create the artwork, such that if art blocks goes down, because if you follow token, you're right, it is an HTTPS URL file, right? That can go down at any point. But if art blocks does goes down, you can go on chain, download the script, download the inputs, and regenerate the very image that you that your NFT represents, right? So it's
Right.
like it's almost kind of like a what do you call it? Like a worst case doomsday scenario vault that is available on chain, and because the qualities of putting something in the blockchain is it's permanent unless the blockchain itself destructed is like destroyed, right? It's like a 0 to 1 prop
Right.
kind of case here. And so that kind of is that on chain? It's incredibly gray, right?
Yeah.
And
In a blockchain,
we-
it's just forced redundancy. Let's all remember that too, right? It's just
Yeah.
really forced redundancy across all this data centers. So
I did want to as well address like the reason why somebody would choose to use one of those less on-chain methods than using purely on-chain, and I believe it's simply just cost-saving methods. Am I not mistaken?
cost
Or
saving and technical
simplicity.
work.
Yes, exactly.
Technical
The
work, that's one of the
simplicity of
big
getting it
ones.
uploaded. Yeah.
Going to
So what-
HTTPS is
we are all going to die. You said is HTTP, right?
yeah,
Mm.
that is centralized. I don't know if they're
Right.
serving IPFS files behind a proxy. I don't know, but their entry point is an HTTPS file, not file, but
Right.
URL.
Right.
But
Even if it's a proxy, is a little weird, but yeah.
yeah, but yeah. So like, to really add to that, it's like we're not at a place as an NFT industry that where we are really pushing the standards of how we resolve data in a way that is not segregated. I feel like every project has their own proprietary way of doing it. And because of those walled gardens, it's a little bit harder to share some of the stuff. Not to say there isn't any sharing, there has been, and I think a lot of what we do with all of our provenance mechanisms from every IP that we've done before and into the future, all learn a lot from prior art.
Right.
But yeah, so like this kind of like serve with a centralized source, but give a doomsday version. That design pattern is probably one the de facto right now. FX Hash uses that to an extent. Art Blocks is one of the more obvious cases of that design, right? Which these kind of designs, it's almost like, in my eyes, it's like you sleep at night thinking it's safe, but you forgot to lock the door. And I say that because we haven't really ever, like, you feel safe because of your neighborhood, but all it takes is one bad event, and if Art Blocks goes down for a significant amount of time, will people use the Doomsday Vault correctly? Right? Like, it's like you don't prepare for a
Right.
Doomsday without training, right?
Right.
Without infrastructure, right? And so, I think it eases our minds, but I don't know yet. I don't think I've experienced it as an industry, but that. So in that way,
I mean, yeah. I mean, to add to that, right? So even when we were uploading stuff to IPFS, it's like we don't necessarily have a measurement of how redundant it is.
yeah,
Most people are just
Yeah.
firing and forgetting, right? We're just
Interesting.
firing.
Yeah.
We get a hash and we put that fucker on an NFT and call it a day. It's like 90%. So
yeah, and that is, that is also a very could be potentially anxiety.
yeah, it's a legitimate problem. Yeah.
Right. And so the end game is then, well, let's produce the very art or store the very art on the very same platform that your NFT exists on, right?
Right.
If the NFT has value, then storing it on the same medium that has value should
Makes
be better, right? And should be more permanent. right? And so on-chain art in the most primitive version is you take your PNG file, right? Let's just say it's 50 kilobytes, and you will literally put it on chain, right?
Right.
And if you do that, depending to which opcodes you use to do the S store or SS store 2, it could cost a lot or cost a little less. But you can imagine 50 kilobytes will probably run you over 1.5 to 2, right? But
Did you say 1.5 to ETH? I didn't
one and
catch
a
that.
half to 2E. Sorry, I missed
Wow.
a 2 there.
Yeah.
It's gonna
Yeah.
cost a lot. Like it's about 10 kilobytes. I want to say is about half an ETH at 50 GWay. Half
Wow.
an ETH, a little bit plus. This is napkin math from my side. But that is the most primitive on-chain design, right? But if you have a PFP of 10,000 images, 10,000 times 50 kilobytes times its gas price,
Right.
it's just not a
Yeah.
profitable measure to do that, right? And two is it is clogging up a lot of block space, right? Like that is a lot of
Mm,
data that is on a
true.
blockchain, right? So the only way we can really circumvent this problem, right, is well, data is expensive. But one thing that isn't expensive is actually computation on chain, and I don't mean this in mined computation, transaction computation. What we're really referring to is simulated computation, as in
Right.
when you call, let's just say, the balance of contract function of a ERC20, that doesn't you're not spending money to do that, right? Like, you're not sending gas to know how many ERC20 tokens you own, right? Instead, what's really kind of happening
Some
is
servers looking up, yeah.
yeah, some node provider is just simulating that call and getting the output and giving it to you, right? But that simulated call is a trivial amount of cost. It doesn't cost you anything, right? So then the idea of on-chain art is like, wow, what's stopping us from just returning a little bit more than just a number of your balance? What's stopping us from constructing a SVG through massive weird string things, right? Like string interpolations, right? What's stopping us from actually doing the generative art in that very call itself and giving you the output all in there? We're going to do it all in there, right? Instead of doing it beforehand, storing it on chain. We're gonna put all the means to do it on chain, and then make it produce
Yeah.
it right on the call, right? And there's like this paradigm shift that you're trying to reconcile with, right? Where now all of a sudden you're getting the benefit of low data costs because you're not storing every image on chain. You're just storing the means to create all those images on chain, which means you only have to really store one system for 10,000 images, right? Like
Right.
And the
that's
bytecode becomes the art itself, right? And then the image generation and the calling, the computation of the image is like looking at it almost, right? It's
yeah.
like the difference between like a movie and watching a movie is the way I see it. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's like
Interesting. Okay.
that's a one way to
Mhm.
interpret it, right? So to kind of give some numbers to this all is we all measure EVM measures computation with gas, right? This
Mhm.
abstract unit of computational cost. It's not economic. Gas price makes it economic. I think there's a huge distinction for a lot
Right.
of folks.
Yeah.
Gas is abstract. Gas price makes it economic, right? So just gas alone, the blockchain on Ethereum has about 30 something million block limit, gas limit, meaning that within one block, you can only do about 30 million worth of computation, right? Well, with Alchemy, let's just say, as a node provider, they provide services to interact with the blockchain. You can simulate a call with about 550 million gas, which, if you think about it, that is about 10 to 20x how much you can do in a single block, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
you can't change state. You can't do a lot of things, but you can simulate a lot of things within 550 million gas, right? That's like 10 blocks worth of gas that you can just use to do string interpolations, to do byte manipulations, to do like trigonometry functions to calculate, where this line should be, right? And your generative art, right? So that's kind of where the gold mine is with on-chain art, right? And we have already seen in this industry a lot of great products or projects that come out of this spirited thought of
Right.
doing computation at the moment of token URI call. And I think probably the best example is the Terraforms project,
Forbes,
Great
right?
example.
the greatest.
What I would argue one of the best, right? If not the
Yeah.
best, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a great project. I would look at it and it's like, I would not have immediately guessed that it was on chain. And I think that's kind of the best on chain projects where you don't feel like you feel strictly limited.
You're like, no way, I can't believe that's fucking on chain.
Right. And so,
Mhm.
if you were to go on a Terraform's contract, NFT on OpenSea, you right click on the image, you would notice is the image is actually an HTML file. Like visuals that you're looking at is just a full website, pretty much. Right. So with that in mind, that pretty much meant is on chain. They constructed a website for you.
Yeah.
Right.
In
Like
fact, they have a JS script in as a string on the contract. That's
and that's doing the
Right.
animations, right?
Yeah.
And it's because OpenSea supports the HTML standard. All they had to do was generate a good HTML that OpenSea can interpret into an artwork, right?
Right.
And so to that, it's like, well, that kind of tells me is the potential ceiling is absurdly high all of a sudden, right? Like the potential of on-chain art is, I think in the long run, is it should eclipse the qualities of IPFS based art systems that we have, or even centralized source, because it's not just a better NFT for value appreciation, but two is you're not quite limited as most people think you are when it comes to the creative vision that you want to produce. If not, you are more enabled to do more visionary work, because now you can obviously do is like, which Terraforms has, is like you can change the state of your NFT, right? So there's like a dream state, if I remember, for Terraforms, and you get to change the artwork live, right? You can't really do that with IPFS, right? Like that's impossible with IPFS without a centralized entity coming in and producing it on your behalf, right? So
I would say they're two different tools. Where like we basically created two different tools for us to work with art, right? So I think on the point of like the interactivity, that's the most powerful thing about the on-chain art, keeping everything on chain. Everything's instant. There's no like syncing of anything. You can do true game mechanics that way. It just opens up a massive realm of possibilities. And then for the visuals itself, I think it makes more sense being on chain as an NFT, but not to discount the utility of IPFS provides us as an artist. I think it gives a lot of massive.
Yes, it will always have a place.
But it's a different. It's a different tool for a different type of art, right? That's the way I see it.
Yeah, like I don't see Foundation or any of these guys going. I'll say that much, right? Like
in fact, we love IPFS, like torrenting, all that shit. We love, right? P2P file sharing,
So I guess my big kind of like, what do you call it? Linking thought here, right? Is then why aren't we seeing more on-chain art right now, right? And I think some of the biggest reasons is one is mindshare. It's not a system that is well understood yet as a medium of work. But two is building on-chain art is pretty freaking hard. It is really, really freaking hard because I've looked at Terraform's SVG not HTML construction.
Yeah,
insane. It is dark ruins, right? It's proprietary towards the Terraform's project, right? So with that just isn't really dry, right? Like it's not like a very what do you call it, like CS concept of like reusable code that allows us to build on top of each other, right? And so if we were to take that philosophy into the world of on-chain, right, where if we want to lower the ceiling of creating on-chain art, we should take good engineering principles and bring it on-chain. And so we've already started to see this actually with projects like Spectra, Xerox Spectra, which is like a 3D renderer, on-chain 3D renderer, pretty much.
Right. Yeah.
And pretty much they pitched it as like anybody can use this system. It's a public good, right? It's a library, almost something you would download an npm like 3.js, right? So we're taking that pretty much and going on steroids. and that's in some ways that's ABF protocol. That is
Mm.
ABF. ABF is all about how do we make on-chain art about the art and not about the solidity, not about learning how to do byte manipulations, learning how to do SVG constructions, HTML constructions, how to create a GIF file, how to create a WAV file. We remove all that stuff. We say, hey, here's a simple environment to work with, albeit obfuscated a little bit. Brainfuck is not a particularly easy
Yeah,
language to work with.
we can talk about
Yeah.
why brainfuck too after this.
Yeah.
But keep
Yeah,
going.
for sure.
But like the idea here is now is, well, we provide you all the we already did all the hard work for you. There's a great pixel renderer system available to you, right? Like it does all the work to produce an image for you. You get to focus on just performing your generative art and dictating what those pixels would look like, right? And that all of a sudden we do strongly believe that this is like hopefully a step in the direction where we can start introducing more mind share, right?
Yeah.
More exposure towards the on-chain art movement as something that you can experiment with, something that is approachable, something that you can learn about, right? And this to me is kind of like a step between tool for people, because it's not going to be able to like ABF is not designed to perform terraforms, right?
Right.
Like that is still going to exist. Those hyper proprietary on-chain art, but
you can do it. So we can talk about the separation.
You can, but I think there's a
Yeah,
feasibility mark where it's like if you guys could do it, like if somebody does it, call me convinced, and I'll and you know, like, and I don't know, I don't want to promise any prizes, but like we'll figure something out, right? Like right, like that. But the concept to me, it's like it plays into the tiny code art movement, not the tiny code art, the tiny code movement of people trying to shove like a JavaScript tweet code in a tweet within the character limits of a tweet. It plays into you know, I can't think of those names anymore, but you know those like websites that gives you previews of React components. Ash,
yes,
like you can
code
instantly
pens and stuff like that.
yeah, code pens, and you can fork them. You can change it to your liking. You can use somebody else's work, right?
Yeah.
ABF is quite like that in some forms, where you can share a URL and somebody can play on your system, or you can play on somebody else's system. The renderer system, like the idea of creating the image, that is all modularized, right? Like
just to provide like maybe some additional context, because we went from brainfuck, like ABF as a project, to this concept of like on-chain art and us trying to make a public good, the concept of hyperstructure. Just for clarity, the contract code that actually outputs the image is just Solidity code, right? And that's fully separate from brainfuck. All that contract does is intake, you know, a 250 whatever, you know, X number of bits string, and then that it'll do whatever it wants with that. But basically what David has created is, now how do you get that data into the renderer? And that's where it gets interesting,
right?
Yeah, so you can imagine like there's a lot of causation that brought us to where we are today with what is ABF. We saw there's a really apparent demand and need that for on-chain art to succeed as one of the more predominant forces of NFT issuance and production. It needs to have better tooling available to it, better mindshare, more people interested in developing it. And to do that, I do think we need to have a more, not approachable is the right way to say it, a more minimalist entry point where your focus is not on the complexities of on-chain art, but more so on enjoying the use of it and producing it. And so
the breadth of it, right? It's like just with each renderer, again, right? Dave was describing what was it, 500 billion computation gas, 500 million?
500 billion. Yeah. So so I wanted to lead into that, right? So then then you would ask is like, what are we abstracting away from you, right? That's the big question, right? We're making an argument of saying that the ceiling is lower. What are we abstracting? Well, the key thing that we're abstracting, as we kind of already alluded here, is the concept of what we call a renderer, right? This monolith, not a monolithic, but this contract that interprets data that you provided. So it's called props, as a reference almost to
To
React
front end. Yeah.
front end development props. It takes
Yeah.
props in as a but and uses those props and produces to out a, well, in our case usually a visual image, right? But
Right.
technically it doesn't stop there, right? But
Yeah.
it
can be
takes all
anything.
that bytes,
Mhm.
it does its own crap, right? It either converts it into RGB colors, it either converts it into XY coordinates, it does whatever it does,
Yeah.
right?
Maybe interpret like some bits as like the radius of a circle, something like
Sure,
that, right? It's
right.
like it could be
And
anything.
Mm.
it's really just up to that renderer to decide, right? So in this way, right, with renderers that does all the hard lifting for you to do all that kind of dark runes kind of math of like figuring out how to convert a file out for you. All you have to focus on is giving it the right props, right? You only have to focus on that part. If the props are right, the renderer will produce what you expect it to produce, right? So there's this. Now we pretty much were able to black box one of the hardest parts about creating on-chain art, which is
Right.
learning well enough how Solidity works, how SVGs work, how other file formats work, and produce it in a way that is computationally efficient enough to run on-chain, right? So that part is abstracted away. That part you don't have to care about if you're just an artist on ABF, right?
Yeah, that's
So
huge.
your focus then is becoming, how do I produce those bytes, right? How do I get these bytes out in a way that is interesting and I have computational control over, generative art control over, right? And that's where the brainfuck language steps in, right? That's where I feel like I'm throwing all of my
Throw all the
it
logic
throws everything
in
out
you.
the door again.
Yeah.
It's
all
like
the logic
it's like
we've talked
it's like we,
about
we,
until
we
now.
lined it up for
throw
like
it
a
out.
perfect home run, and then I tripped on my shoelace by saying
Yeah.
brainfuck, the language, and it's like, god damn it, right? But like, no, there's merits to it that we'll talk about more, but
Hmm.
we give you a computational environment to manipulate these props, right? And that computational environment is not Solidity, because Solidity is quite a foreign kind of computational space for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So we give you brainfuck, right? Which is both intentional in its degeneracy, but also a realization of the limitations of what we can actually give you, computationally speaking, on chain. Right? We are not going to be running a V8 Chrome on chain. We're not going to run a WASM environment on chain. That's just not within our reasonability to do. Right? And also, if we do give those, people will start exploiting those systems and giving out too much data. Like it ruins the minimalism of the system.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
to that, in some ways, I kind of just like, if you think about it, you look up online, what is the smallest programming language that you can write like a compiler for? It happened to be brainfuck, right? And so there we have an interpreter that's only about 30 lines long, very
And
short.
in some
Right.
history about like brainfuck too, right? I mean, this was like made by essentially CS students, right? Grad students,
Yeah.
like fucking around trying to come up with like the least number of like opcode languages that you could do shit with, and then they
That's
said
Turing
like
complete, right?
that's Turing complete, right? That's the concept of like being able to do any computation. So
And
it's
so
a brainfuck to write in, right?
yeah, and I think like
I'm gonna pull it up here while we talk.
yeah, so like, you know, there's a lot of other language classes like this, which is like they're not for practical use. They're more of an expression of philosophy, of thought, of esotericism, right? But I don't think there's a better language that has a funnier name than BF.
Yeah,
Right,
and just
like-
think about like him designing the language, right? Like he's going through the process of like, okay, what's the least number of operations I need to do? What kind of like syntax makes sense? And he jammed it out and showed his pals, and I guess it's the widely supported esoteric
Yeah,
language.
I know, yeah. Also the most widest, the most
Widely supported, yeah.
well-renowned
well-known.
esoteric language, right? So
Yeah, and it's academic and it's called brainfuck and it's perfect.
yeah,
It's
it has
fun.
the best name, honestly.
Yeah.
One of my
For real.
the best name, right? And then it's the 8 opcodes. It's painful to use, but they're not impossible. I'll say that much. But also I love the aesthetics of the language when you write it out, because it's if you look at you can go on if you don't mind, Bitwiz, go to documentation, the brainfuck part,
Yeah, I'll open it
Yeah.
and
up.
you can scroll down, you'll see all 8 opcodes. The 8 opcodes are all like different
Yeah.
punctuation marks of a Latin language, right? Or of just the Unicode spec. And those 8 opcodes are just symbols. They're hieroglyphs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it
So
makes
hieroglyphs is also an interesting usage for a language because think about it, all languages, modern languages are basically English, right?
Yeah.
We don't use hieroglyphic languages. And there's something
Mm,
that like I think it comments on like the openness and the like the true internationalization of something, right?
Yeah, and I
And
found that
people
to
have been
be
talking about
very.
hieroglyphs and stuff like that for a
I
long
really
time.
like that about brainfuck is that
Yeah.
you can't accidentally write a message out of it, right? You can't like let's just say the language
mm,
is like A B C D and then E F G. Like so the 8 opcodes are actually Latin letters, right? Then people can accidentally write English messages with brainfuck code. But since these are 8 punctuations,
right.
it has this almost common ground we all have to come towards and say like this is meaningless to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna give it meaning by writing something
Yeah.
fun out of it,
It just looks cool.
right?
So if you scroll
I got it
down,
pulled up
Vic, or
here.
if you scroll down all the way, there's some code snippet, just a link to code snippets like brainfuck snippets and algorithms and that resources.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. And so if you scroll down this wiki page, you'll
Yeah.
see some
Oh yeah,
examples.
ESO links. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just looks beautiful, and I don't know
It's
if
very
anybody's
cool.
played with like assembly code or any of that shit, or like, I mean, it's way better than assembly.
It
But
has
Texas
this
is
like,
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
this is
really
me
cool.
alluding to something really fun. Is has this almost like alien sci-fi
Yeah.
kind of touch to it. It just
Mhm,
feels so
mhm.
foreign, but also weirdly familiar because it's a Unicode
Yeah.
that we look at all the time in our daily lives.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, like the thing is too, like that I think about is like all these contracts on Ethereum, they're just bytecode, right? So when we are reading other people's contracts, we're actually just reading
we're reading the
a-
ABIs.
yeah, like an uploaded version to Etherscan of that contract, which is so it's not actually like that contract that you're reading is not actually on chain. The bytecode is, and then I don't know, something about just ABF being hieroglyphs and like no actual like strings and stuff like that. Like I don't know, it feels like it's
And I feel like
kind of more.
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like in so many ways, the choice of the brainfuck language dictated so much of our vision and our brand and our energy about this project.
Yeah.
Right? Like the name
That's
was
very true.
absolute brainfuck.
Yeah.
The style is minimalism. It's almost neutral to the fault of the thing, and the brand, the core, right? The hyperstructure qualities of it. We wanted to build something that feels like
Yeah.
it
This is the
came
first
out of the
project.
heart of brainfuck.
Yeah. It's
The
not on
philosophy of brainfuck.
POB. It's not on a POB.studio domain, right? This is its own
Yep, our
domain.
first non-studio domained project because we believe it deserves its own space, right?
Yeah.
And,
Right.
It's truly its own entity, yeah. And that's
This
where
actually-
the ABFC name comes from ABF core.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yes. So, yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Honestly, I kind of forget where I was going to go with that. I just kind of followed what you were saying, and then I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting." Yeah,
Yeah.
but because there's somewhere else we can go with that too. But yeah, I guess there's so many things around this project that feel like they could be kind of complex to the layman, and maybe this is a very technical breakdown of what brainfuck is. But at its core, brainfuck solves a lot of like really pragmatic, practical problems that need to be solved in order for the space to evolve. And so there's going to be a technical component to it. And there's going to be a very technical component.
I want to say this is almost like a way to say this is alpha, right? Where alpha is about the protocol, about performing with the protocol. I think as we enter the beta, we're well aware that most folks don't quite care about what I just may have just talked about. I think they have maybe a passing interest, but it's not something that they are professionally or intellectually curious in growing with us, right? But to that point, this is a very tactical choice to use a language called brainfuck as a degenerate, like
Yeah.
where we're trying. Like I hope that this gets into
Yeah.
people's like thoughts, just like how
Mhm.
Ether rocks
Yeah.
or like some of the more degenerate projects do,
For-
right? And
For clarity on that point, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're not using brainfuck because it's giving us some technical advantages, right? Or that's not the point of this, right? And that's why we even call it an absolute brainfuck core, because there really is two factions within this project, right? It's the people
Right.
who are writing renderers in pure Solidity and really pushing the barrier of what on-chain art can actually be. And then there's the aesthetic part of actually writing on the layer on top of those renders, which is brainfuck, and then trying to produce art given the finite limitations you have and sanity you also have to produce something interesting. And that's I
Mhm.
think the dynamics between those two concepts is where I think the art and the beauty really lies, and we'll see some interesting
Right.
behaviors happen. But
And
just for clarity, like the brain fuck doesn't give you it doesn't make the art better. It
Yeah.
is the art. It is the
Right.
art itself.
it is the art. That's the best way
Yeah.
to say. And
Yeah.
to drop a
Yeah.
hint, not just visual works are interesting.
Mhm. Mhm.
The potential of the protocol lies
It's huge.
in a lot of forms of expression.
Yes.
And
Because
that's
it's
something
only 8
that
opcodes and it doesn't
Mhm.
there's no syntax errors in brainfuck.
yeah. So
Important
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
like I think post pragmatic me shilling the project. In some ways, I feel like this project brings it back to our name of our namesake as a studio.
Yes.
There's a reason why we don't whitelist. We don't have a curation layer of like who
Mhm.
gets to use it. Because if you dare to use it, you're the whitelist because you dare to use it, right? And so that way it's like, so it's almost like a consensus algorithm in that way, right? Where you're like, it's a proof of work all of a sudden, where you got to prove that you could do the work of writing
Yeah.
brainfuck, right?
Right.
And so to that point, I kind of found it poetic that it plays to our namesake, to our qualities of our projects, where I don't think a lot of our projects are quite like handing it to you on a silver plate. Here's free money. Here's an airdrop of free
Yeah.
money. It's not that we won't do airdrops and stuff like that. It's just that's not who we are right now. But we want you to complete the picture with the NFT, right? And by completing the picture, the NFT is finished. I think that's a big part of our studio's ethos about how we produce IPs. And I think we hopefully found that with Hash already, with London already.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think ABF is going to show that in a fundamentally different way.
Yes.
Uh,
100%.
and I don't want to tell about the other projects in the future. They
Yeah.
all kind of call to that
Mhm.
same energy.
This also like is really fun for us too, because we usually don't talk to too many people. We're pretty introverted, even in our dealings online. So, I mean, this is a project it's not like a one-off. It's not like we're dropping something and we move on to the next one, right? This is like it's a community. It's an idea, right? An idea requires like
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
right. The
attendance.
system
Right.
is designed to not shut down ever. Right, like
Yeah.
there's no pause function.
On that note, actually, maybe we can chime in and zoom in on what a hyperstructure is for a second and what it means for this to be a hyperstructure. Because I know Ash briefly mentioned it. We've talked about it in previous podcast episodes, but this concept is amazing and it's really new. And I feel like maybe it's not very new, but I feel like it's new to the blockchain. And the idea that we're able to put out one of the, what I think would be probably one of the first legit hyperstructure projects, I think it's worth noting. And perhaps you can share what that means to the layman.
Yeah. I'm going to describe what it is through the atomic components of what makes something hyperstructure, and then maybe Ash, you can chime in and
Try to make it like
and color that, right?
Yeah.
So a hyperstructure is something that's unownable. As in, there's not a particularly party or an entity or a group of people that has a special privilege to change this thing in a way that could be towards their own interest, right? There's no token, there's no governance, there's no DAO, there's no centralized company that can come in and say we're going to be greedy. right? But point two is also very important, is because of this, a hyperstructure is a very, very egalitarian system. If you have an intention to use it, you get to use it, and nobody's permission is needed. That's, I think, point two of a very good hyperstructure. And because of these two things, it lends itself to a very nice quality, is the system is permanent and the system is reliable, because it's, well, nobody can shut it down. One, right? Two is it's egalitarian, so it has to be designed in a way where it doesn't care who calls the contract, who calls the system, or who participates in the hyperstructure, right? All it has to care about is you give it what it needs, and it'll give you what you need out of it, right? It's so egalitarian, it becomes a system that is almost, like, I guess in some ways permanent.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
anchored,
to
right?
provide some more, so hyperstructure as a concept itself is not new. Technically,
Yeah.
I mean, really, obviously, right? Because it means stuff. Contracts have been around since the beginning, right? So I mean, the word is new. The concept, the idea of recognizing it as a unique thing, separate to something else, is new, and I think that's a really important thing, pivot point for us as a space to put more value on that side of things. So, I mean, just a very simple example, right? Like splits, I think was like the first highlighted when this
Xerox
concept
splits.
of hype. Yeah,
It's not the
Xerox-
first. Uniswap is
Yeah, it's not.
arguably
It's
the first hyperstructure.
it's definitely
Right,
not the
right.
first. Like, yeah, there's always going to be, obviously something like that. But I was saying when that term hyperstructure came out, I remember splits being kind of the simplest example people would use,
big
right?
example.
So what does that mean? I mean, just to give some a contrary example, right? Like hash contract is owned by POB.eth. Like the POB.eth, our multi-sig wallet, has root access to that contract, meaning we can change, we can change it. Yeah, where does the mint fee go and stuff like that. And so that's us having admin privileges over a contract. That's not a hyperstructure. Splits is different because they deploy the contract. There's no owner. The contract does a computation. It just routes money to two different things or whatever X number of things. You pass in. It's basically like a pure function almost, for any out there. But so I mean, I think that should, looking at those two examples should give you an idea.
Like
what does hyperstructure
Uniswap
really mean?
V1 is a hyperstructure, right?
Yes.
V2,
No
V3,
backdoors.
when there's a token governance, it's not a hyperstructure.
And it's the backdoor,
Yeah. So, like, what are the constraints of hyperstructure? What are the benefits? Like, we kind of implied the benefits of it. So, what are the constraints? Well,
Great.
If you don't have an owner, the system is largely, the day you created it, that's how it is. Period.
That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So to that point, you don't solve problems the same way you solve problems when you have a governing token, right? Because
but it's that concept of when you put it out, that's the way it is actually a dope fucking concept, because we haven't really had that before. It's like, really seriously, like for even any type of software distribution, that app of some kind or npm module or script or something lives somewhere. No developer is pulling IPFS or JS scripts from IPFS. So no one's all on the same page here, right? We're all pulling it from GitHub or npm or something like that, and those are dynamic like locations for data. They can get hacked. Anything can happen, right?
So much, yeah.
I think it's a massive realization for.
And I think I really want to add to that at conceptual level is, I think hyperstructure is just a fundamentally different paradigm of thinking of product, of delivering product work and delivering IP in general.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're at a point where I think we're only tapping into like the surface of creating utility-driven hyperstructures, where I think ABF, as one of the more first concepts, is one of the first hyperstructures where I think it is a utility system, but it's a lot more about the universe it can imbue, the community it captures. That in some ways is also its hyperstructure, right? Where it's stewards of the system, where it's like I like kind of like to think of it almost like mimetically like the game Doom, like the original Doom, where there's literally a subreddit called It Runs Doom.
Yeah.
And the game is so ported into so many places, and like I literally saw it running on a freaking printer. the game Doom, and I saw like
That's
people.
hilarious.
It's a part of its craft, right? But like in that way, the game doesn't feel like it's owned by a developer, right? It's
Hmm.
owned by the community. It's an expression of the community, right? And I feel that in some ways that has hyperstructure qualities to it, where it doesn't have an owner anymore, right? This product doesn't have an owner anymore, and it can be used, privileged to be used by anybody. And if you want to do what you want to do within that community, it's all up to you. Do you want to do it? You go do it, right? You want to put it on a printer,
Right.
you go put it on a printer,
Yeah.
right? I'm not stopping you, right? Like it.
And
Um,
I mean, to comment additionally on like what we do as a studio, right? It's like this combination of art and technologies. I think, I mean, entertainment or the art space is always on the cutting edge of tech, right? So like part of our responsibility is to push that boundary and
Yeah.
distill those ideas in such a way that we're truly communicating its true nature, right? I mean, that is really what the art is. And we're doing it in practical fashion, which is what ABF is, right? That's what NFTs are essentially, right? And so, I mean, I think hopefully, if this is successful, people will be inspired by this type of design, this type of what David has built out. I'm sure it can be reused for other applications.
and I like to think that within this is only the start of.
In fact, there could be rival organizations to us. I would like to introduce that concept here now.
Yeah,
you
that
write-
was something we talked about.
Yeah,
live.
if you write
Yeah.
an interpreter and that's a different language, go ahead and spin up your own X language core, you know, and go head to head with
Interesting.
us. I'd
Yeah.
love to see it.
Yeah,
Competition's
and
good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I come back to, and that this is the start of a journey for all of us. And what we got going is more than a blank sheet of paper than it is of anything we've ever done as a studio. Right. We always create things that have blank parts of it that needs to be filled out by the community. This is the blankest sheet we got going. And this conversation on the podcast is the first thing that we are going to learn with you guys how to use the system. That's where it gets really exciting to me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, as much as like I think my job is to communicate what it is, I think in some ways my job is to tell people and share people, here's a stub of potential. You don't need to understand the full thing. You just need to understand its potential, right? I don't think you go to Yosemite as a and because you're a geologist, you know exactly how the rock formations of the Half Dome came together, and because you know exactly how Half Dome was geographically constructed, you get to enjoy it as a beautiful thing. No, you can go there, enjoy it because you have an eye, you appreciate beauty, and you appreciate the hard work to hike or whatever, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what we got to do as with ABF, right? As much as I can explain it with hours and hours and hours, we need the community, we need us to also step in and just show its power, show its beauty, show its potential. And I think hopefully this podcast becomes a way of like, again, documenting that experience for us as a studio, documenting it for the community, documenting it for maybe greater posterity as well, right? But yeah, I feel like I keep coming back to that, and that it's in some ways humbling, and then in some ways it's daunting, very daunting, that we don't like what, like, even to the simple question is like, how do we make money?
We forgot about that part,
right? Like it's almost like it's like we had to ask that a lot. I was just like, well,
well, fuck.
right? Like there's a lot of things, right? But like, you know, so
That's good. I mean, that's
we
what
hope
did.
we hope people are interested in this journey with us. That's, I think, our big thing. As well, I think Alpha is all about is getting our first group of folks that are interested in going along this journey with us. And if you are interested, let us know and DM us or whatever, and we're happy to.
P4
bring
Stowboy
everybody
is
in.
the highlight member currently. He's really
Yeah.
We have what's his name, 0x113D, Matt
Actually got it
Castle's
right,
yeah, Matt Castle's co-creator in the Discord, has yet said one thing so far. That's good. Keep it going. But yeah,
I mean, guys, to everybody is, I frankly could not give 5 fucks about how many followers you have. If you use the ABF system, you have my respect.
Yep.
You don't have to be a big wig or small.
Yeah.
Like you
Anyone.
want to use it, you
Please,
go
yeah.
use it, and we'll have open arms and we'll
Yeah.
welcome you to the court.
In
Like,
fact, the
that's-
builder is an excellent educational tool. Any academics listening to this, so
Right.
feel
Right.
free.
So
I actually wanted to
ahead.
show an output from our Twitter page that we've already shared here, and kind of just touching on the elegance of the Brainfuck code. So we also have the input here, which is really cool. But this is kind of what people can expect. And I'll zoom in on that alpha is coming, the Brainfuck code on the right here. But this is the output. And let me see here. I'll pull up the input just so you guys can see what made this. It's so interesting just to see the elegance in the code and how esoteric and alien-like this actually looks. And this is just in the most rudimentary beginning forms of what you can do with Brainfuck. And we don't even know what that upper bound even looks like remotely close, because we're providing something for the community. Yeah, we haven't seen it yet. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me here, guys. Just knowing that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's about to be created that we haven't seen yet. That's pretty incredible. And like Dave was saying, like if anybody even has the courage to use Brainfuck, I mean, hats off to you. There's a lot of respect earned just for having the audacity to even look up the Brainfuck language and think, okay, you know what, I'm gonna give it a try here. I'm gonna try my best to create something. And really, in all that Dave's been saying here, and Ash as well, is we've created an environment that kind of made it as easy as possible for you to kind of get started. But then that upper bound has yet to be realized. And so you'll have the tool, you have the opportunity, and you have everything you need to kind of get the ball rolling. But the end result is impossible to predict. And that's so exciting to me, just what we're going to see come out of this.
Yeah, and then the current version that's deployed live on abf.dev is the Goerli testnet version. So that just lets anybody play with it basically for free. We're not selling anything. We haven't even wrote our own collection, made our own art yet. So that's not what we're doing here. You know, we have a cool idea. We just want to share it with people and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I want to add is, as much as we're shitting on the language a little bit for its hard brain, I've written a little bit, and as a developer of many years, nothing is get close to therapy than just sitting there. You're like, wow, I have a 0.125% chance of writing the right opcode and making this code work. It's if you think about it, that's so freaking crazy, right? If you think about
12.5, just try.
Right, you can literally flip it, like, roll it. I don't know. Does 8-sided dice exist? Like you can roll a die.
I believe they do. Yeah.
Right, and then be like, okay, I'll put that character in. Right, like obviously I'm being a little bit trivial here, but
it's true though. You can't do that.
It's like
it
slows your brain in such a way that you're just like, I've heard folks like get delighted from just getting a pixel to turn red.
Right.
But it's about the simple things again. It's about the art. It's about the fun. Like I know that we all are into NFT for art meme, but like once you introduce 10 ETH floors, 100 ETH floors, airdrops, it gets a little bit different. Not to say it's bad, but I don't think there's a more pure expression of doing art than probably having fun on ABF and enjoying the challenge that it imposes on you, right? So Brainfuck is not all a bad thing.
Right. It's a fun thing.
It's a beautifully aesthetic language, and then there's one additional quirk to it that just really adds some interesting dynamics to it. So, well, I mean, we'll introduce and talk about those concepts later on, but we're very excited about that part of it as well. But there's a reason. There's a reason for its absurdity, right?
Yeah.
Right. And again, I'll post this up here. You guys can follow ABF_dev on Twitter for updates. You know, alpha. There's going to be a lot coming out after alpha, and it'll be, as you put it before, Dave, a slow drip. And so keep up with the updates, guys. There's going to be a lot happening. Obviously, I feel like you guys are still working out as well what exactly you want to do with Brainfuck, right? Like you said, you haven't put out your own collections yet. We haven't put out any of our own art. And so there's still this like this vacuum that we're gonna fill of creating something with our own technology. And the ideas that are up in the air right now are really cool, guys. They're different, I will say. And I love
quite
that
a lot
this
of pitches internally that we've been throwing out.
yeah, so many pitches and so many things flowing back and forth. But this just comes from the heart of the creative spirit from within the studio, and that's the greatest thing about Brainfuck. It's so true to the studio, and just the process of making something not necessarily for a dollar return, but for the satisfaction of creating something useful and something that truly adds value to the space, not trying to add value to our own wallets. And I just love that this was product focused first, not business focused. And so we're sitting here laughing because we haven't even yet worked out the component. Well, like, how are we going to make some money from this? You know? But it's a beautiful thing, and it really is that this is probably the truest form of decentralization, right? Hyperstructure. And so I think as well, we're creating a model for others, being an example of what a successful hyperstructure could look like, which is very, very early, even for hyperstructure in general. And so I'm really and I'm stoked to see what this becomes.
To even add to that, I don't think we're just creating precedent for hyperstructures, but hopefully also creating precedent for an organization that can produce things like ABF.
Absolutely.
I think that's very important. Is that obviously we go through the turmoil, like the turmoil of bull and bears, right? But like,
no doubt,
I think with our future IPs, you'll also kind of see what our end game is when it comes to keeping a roof above our heads with stuff like ABF, right? Like, and how we still need to have a desire to to make money, right? We're a business. We're not a public goods DAO with a public goods token. We are.
Well, we obviously want eyeballs on our art because we think we have something important to say, right? And so,
absolutely.
I mean, if anything, the monetary value is purely only a reflection of mindshare. But if we can achieve mindshare without that, I mean, we're gonna do that every day, right?
Yeah. That's so well said. And so, welcome to Proof of Beauty 2.0, guys. This is the studio, and this is 2.0. Gosh, now that I feel so excited that we get to say that now. This is we've been dreaming it up for how long? Like, how many conversations have we all had about what is the studio's future? And I think this marks it now. Now it's up to us to, not just us, sorry, everybody within the community to do things, but we're also part of the community. We will use the very things that we ushered into the world, and like future IPs. Stay tuned that too. But this is the start of a very long conversation, I think.
Right. We're gonna have some of the craziest shit we've ever done. Coming soon. So even after this too. But maybe March start.
Before we close out, guys, should we maybe flash up the alpha page here on Growly?
Yep.
Definitely.
So if anybody's interested, you guys can find us on Discord. You guys can find us on Twitter. And reach out if this is something that really stands out to you, something you'd like to play around with. This is kind of just our
abf.dev. That's it. So
now it's abf.dev. There's no alpha now.
Perfect. And so you guys can find a lot of information on this. I mean, I will say, this is going to be a pretty amazing product that gives a lot to the user. Like, there's a lot for the user, and there's a lot you can use to benefit yourself in creating a collection, creating something beyond a collection or a standard collection.
And even if you're interested in not even necessarily the Brainfuck component, but the idea of pushing on-chain art with renderers as special belt things, I think this is a very sorry, I just had an incoming call, but I think this is a project that's right up your alley. It's like a perfect playground to like.
And plus one to that, there's a whole we do want to have a world.
Yes.
I'm not going to say too much about
He
that.
said it.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
say too much beyond that. Read the documentation, the
Yes.
exact orientation, kind of gives a little tip of what we're
Mhm.
trying to do.
We dripping out this world slowly and slowly, but it's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
And I think we should just dedicate a podcast just to talk about some of the
definitely.
ideas once we actually have some more substantial stuff, maybe to
Yeah.
point to as well. But
Mhm.
man, there's this. Yeah.
It's a differentiator. I mean, what he's talking about is really going to differentiate Brainfuck. Of course, there's Brainfuck, the platform, as you mentioned, an FX hash type, Apadoo type, where you can go and mint your art. But this is greater than that. That is a tool that can be used to support a greater narrative. And yeah,
I think Tezo's artists would probably be interested in this, especially since it's going to be in not on mainnet for a while anyway. So Tezo's people, hit us up.
Awesome. Well, guys, it looks like we've been on for an hour and 5 minutes. It was a pretty awesome deep dive into alpha of Absolute Brainfuck. We'll wrap it up here. If you guys want to follow us on Twitter, you guys can catch us on Twitter at @ProofBeauty. Join us on Discord, discord.gg/POB. Make sure to put up our Twitter handle here as well. We sure appreciate everyone who took the time to tune in with us on Friday afternoon. Please like and subscribe to the video if you can. It helps us get this out there to more people. We truly believe that what we have to share from within the studio is important and a value add to the space. And so if you found value or found excitement in what we were talking about today, please make sure to share this on Twitter. With that, thank you guys both for your time today. It was an excellent conversation.
Definitely.